I warned you it was coming. This week we read the infamous double portion Tazria Matzora. You are the only one who said yes. A section of Leviticus that introduces us to tzara'at, an icky skin condition often translated as leprosy, but was probably some other disease. We'll unpack that a bit tomorrow at our Minyan Torah study. But tonight, I want to focus less on tzara'at, the condition, and more on where a metzora, a leper, was required to quarantine during their illness. When an individual with a white discoloration on the skin came to the priests, the portion reads, "The priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days. The risk of communal spread was too great. So they shall dwell alone," the Torah instructs, outside of the camp. Do you know who else was commanded to dwell outside the camp among the lepers who were shunned for their impurity? You can call it out. Miriam was out there for a period of time because she had tzara'at. Not Moses. Ready for this? The Talmud teaches that it's in that same space that the Messiah waits. A tale is told in the Talmud of the great rabbi who meets with Elijah the prophet, and he asks, "When will the Messiah come?" "Go ask her," Elijah responds. "She sits at the entrance of the city among the poor who suffer from illness. She's the one lovingly unwrapping and rewrapping their bandages one at a time." Indeed, way outside on the periphery of camp, a place of illness and ickiness, our tradition reminds us, is also from where our collective redemption will begin. Which reminds me of a story, not about tzara'at, rather wisdom from our tradition about paying attention to the holiness that dwells on the margins, just outside of the city. In a faraway land, a long, long time ago, lived a husband and wife. Although they worked very hard, there was never enough food, never enough money for clothes, and certainly never enough for tzedakah. Early one morning, the husband decided to journey far away from home and try to earn enough money so that when he returns in a year or two, he thought, they would have a much more comfortable life and perhaps even enough for tzedakah. And so he traveled and worked and traveled farther and farther from home. Finally, after 18 years of hard work, he had saved 3 bags of money. One filled with gold coins, a second filled with silver coins, and the third copper. He started on his return home. On the way, he came to a town where a fair was underway. "Perhaps I'll be able to buy something for my wife," he thought. So he began to walk through the fair in search of the most unusual gift. He examined all kinds of objects and listened to the various merchants sing the praises of their own wares, but he found nothing that pleased him. As he was about to leave the fairgrounds, the man noticed an old woman sitting quietly at the entrance of the fair just outside the city gates. In her hands was a large, beautifully woven shawl. "This shawl pleases me," said the man. "How much does it cost?" No. "This shawl is not for sale," answered the woman. "What then do you sell? Are you not a merchant?" he asked. "Well, I am a merchant, but I sell something unusual, not the customary fare, for not everyone wants to buy what I sell," replied the woman, smiling. "I sell wise sayings," she said. "Wise sayings?" asked the man. "And how much does this wisdom cost?" "Well, a bag of copper coins." Fascinated by what he had heard, the man handed over his bag of copper coins to the old woman, and he said, "Tell me the wise saying that this bag will buy." The old woman put the bag of coins in her shawl, and she told the man, "Always follow the main road, though it takes longer." The man waited for the important piece of wisdom. When he realized that that saying was all there was, he turned to the old woman and said, "But where is the wisdom?" "You'll see," she answered. "This advice will be useful someday." The man now became even more curious, and he said, "Here is my bag of silver coins. Sell me more wisdom." "Very well," answered the old woman, taking the bag of silver coins and carefully placing it in her shawl. She said, "What is called ugly is also beautiful." Now the man was even more confused. "You speak in riddles, but I'm no Solomon," cried the man. "My 2 bags of coins, which took me all these years to earn, has been used up for 2 useless sayings." Even though he wanted to leave, to run away from the place, the man was more than ever intrigued by the old woman, and he thought, maybe, just maybe, I can get some wisdom from her that will really help me. And so the man told the old woman that he had 1 more bag of coins, this one filled with gold. "Sell me something worthy of gold," he demanded. And the old woman took the bag of gold and replied, "Beware of anger in the evening, but rather wait until morning." The man turned away, not knowing whether to be angry or sad, and when he turned back to where the old woman had been sitting, there was only a basket with a loaf of bread and a beautiful shawl. The man began to cry, "What have I done? I've given away my hard-earned coins for these 3 sayings. What am I going to do now?" he thought. Mumbling miserably to himself, he decided to take the shawl that he admired so much and that loaf of bread. As he gathered up the shawl, he noticed it was heavy, heavier than a shawl normally would be. And to his surprise, he found the 3 bags of coins wrapped up in the shawl. He looked around for the old woman, but she was nowhere to be found. When he inquired about the old woman, the other merchants laughed at him. "What old woman?" they said. Puzzled by the disappearance of the intriguingly old woman, but joyful about his restored earnings, the man continued on his way home. He walked a long way. When he had grown tired and hungry, he stopped at the side of the road to eat. As he was eating that piece of bread that he picked up from the woman's seat, 2 carriages carrying merchants came down the road. Seeing the lone traveler, the merchants stopped, and they invited him to ride with them to the next town. Of course, the man accepted gladly. As they were driving along, they came to a divided path. Both roads led to the same town, but the path on the left was shorter. As the merchants were about to go to the left, the man riding in the carriage suddenly noticed the shawl in his pack, and he recalled the first piece of advice that the woman offered: always follow the main road, although it might take longer. The man stood up and shouted at the drivers to stop. When he directed them to stay on the main highway, the merchants began to argue with him, obviously. Only when he was about to step down from the carriage did they finally agree. The merchants in the other carriage, however, refused to travel the longer distance, for they were anxious to get to the next town. When the man and his fellow passengers reached that town, they discovered that the other carriage hadn't yet arrived. Perhaps they had a broken wheel, or even worse, they were held up by robbers. "We must go get them," he thought. So they got back into the carriage and returned along the shorter path. As they entered the wooded area, they saw the robbers that indeed had stopped that other carriage. Robbers saw the first carriage approaching. They fled into the woods. The merchants were so grateful to the travelers that they came back to protect them, that they offered them bags and bags of their coins and offered them Godspeed on their way. A few weeks later, the man was about to enter another big city. Wherever he walked, he heard people laughing at their once powerful and beloved king. Wherever he looked, he saw people looting and robbing, since they no longer had any regard for the king's laws. When he entered the courtyard of the king's palace, he saw all the servants and guards pushing and poking at a shriveled up man who looked more like a wild animal than any human being. He had an oversized head and bumps and white lesions all over his skin. His hands and his feet were twisted, and his voice no longer sounded human, rather like the crying sounds of a wounded animal. Everyone was shouting, "Get away, you ugly beast! Of course you're the king of ugliness!" They kept taunting him. When the travelers came closer for a good look at the tortured man, he remembered the advice of the old woman. Do you remember it? What is called ugly is also beautiful. He shouted, "You are beautiful, for everything that God created is beautiful." When these words were spoken, the shriveled up man was suddenly transformed, and he became the handsome, tall king that he had once been. With tears of gratitude, he thanked the traveler and told him how a demon had put a curse on him. Only when someone would call him beautiful could the curse be lifted. Because the traveler had saved the kingdom, the king gave him bags and bags of gold and clothes of a nobleman. When the man finally arrived in his own village, night had fallen, and he didn't want to wake up his wife at such a late hour. Instead, he went to stay at an inn nearby. As he was led to his room, he noticed the servant was his wife, but she didn't seem to recognize him. She looked at him, but without a smile of recognition. The husband's joy turned instantly to disappointment. Could it be because of my rich clothes? Have I changed that much? He sat in the room, becoming more and more upset and more angry. I traveled and I worked, thinking only about my return to my wife and my village, and now I'm here and my wife has forgotten me, he grumbled. The anger stuck at him in torrents, and he hastily picked up his bags, determined to leave and never to return again. But as he did, you know what happens. The shawl dropped out of his pack, and the man remembered that third bit of wisdom. Beware of anger in the evening, but rather wait until morning. So the man restrained his anger and waited impatiently. But he waited until the light. In the morning, as he was about to leave, the servant, his wife, met him at the door, and she exclaimed, "Excuse me if I stared at you last evening, for you reminded me of someone I once knew." "Who's that?" asked the man. "It was my husband who left 18 years ago. I fear he must be dead, but I haven't received any news for some time. It's hard to forget someone you love." "My dear wife," said the man, "forgive me for not telling you last night that it was me. I thought you had forgotten me. I've returned to you with great fortune." So the husband and wife were reunited, and they lived in happiness, with wisdom, with wealth, the rest of their lives. Of course, we know that that wise woman, seated at the entrance to the city in our mythical tale, is just that. It's mythical. It's made up. However, that wise old woman who sat there at the entrance to the city and her shawl, well, they remind us of one of Judaism's basic truths. Often wisdom comes from the most unexpected of places, if only we were open to it. That's why I believe our sages conceived the notion that both the lonely leper and the Messiah in waiting both share that same space on the periphery of society, where, if we're honest, still today, society's most powerless and marginalized live. What if, as the rabbis invite us in this story, we could train our eyes when encountering those people on the fringes to not only see their proverbial leprous skin, but their holy soul too. To open our minds and our hearts that they might even be the Messiah. And our interactions with them have the potential to unlock a better, more prosperous world for us all. How might we treat society's most vulnerable if we were to see every person in that light? That possibility is what inspires me personally in my own pursuits for a better world through tzedakah and tikkun olam. It's what we as a congregation do when we give of our time, of our money, of our energy to feed those who are hungry, to welcome the refugees fleeing from faraway lands, provide school supplies and Thanksgiving baskets and meals and shelter to others who are in need. It's a commitment that we've made for decades, for generations, work we do all year round. We'll celebrate that commitment to our Tikkun Olam effort this Sunday at our spring mitzvah fair at 11 a.m. An opportunity to gather and celebrate our Tikkun Olam accomplishments and participate in hands-on social action projects for all ages, including adults. We have much to be proud of in this respect. Gosh, we have so much more work to do. Shabbat shalom.